And go ahead and hit. Hi, my name is Sarah Wood. I am the Technology Development Manager for National Training Network, and I am very excited to spend the next 30 minutes with you this afternoon to explore using math data to personalize the learning experience. So before we jump into the content that we have planned for this session, let's just go ahead and do a quick little icebreaker. So let's take a moment to think about learning something new. You have an option of several things that you can choose from here on the screen. Is it you want to learn how to skydive, install wallpaper in a bathroom, how to bake a wedding cake or make it and decorate and everything else, or building a pergola? So just take a look at the list here on the screen and in your mind, select one of those things that is most interesting to you to learn how to do. For example, I don't think skydiving would be number one for me. I'm a little bit nervous with heights, but that's okay. And then after you've selected something, I want you to just kind of think for a moment, what would you do to learn how to complete what you've selected? So how would you go about learning how to do that thing? So just kind of take a moment, just jot down to yourself or put in the chat, whatever you think you would employ in order to be able to learn how to successfully do one of those things. I'll give you one more moment. All right, so I'll just get ready to move on just so that way we can stay on time here. So the list is likely different from person to person in terms of which thing to learn has been chosen, as well as how to go about learning how to do that thing. Some people may contact an expert. Some people may go to classes. Some people may look on Pinterest. Some people may watch videos on YouTube. The list is kind of endless, but there are plenty of different ways that you can go about personally deciding to learn how to do something new. And that's kind of the overarching theme of what we're going to be exploring today. So during our session, we will be exploring how formative data assessment or formative assessment data can drive a personalized learning plan for our students. We will take a look at some sample instructional plans and then also give you an exemplar for you to be able to kind of turn and take and try this on your own. So without further ado, let's kind of talk about and look at the different strategies that could be employed to differentiate or personalize the learning experience for our students. So typically in a traditional learning setting, when you think about it, you think about a teacher sits down, they take a look at the concept and the standards at hand that they need to have their students learn and master. And they plan out that unit of instruction that may include a series of lessons, different types of assignments for them to complete, and kind of all leading towards a final assessment at the end. They might share what this plan looks like with students, but truly the majority of the execution lives with the teacher. The teacher is the driver of the bus there and is really the one that is facilitating that learning process. They're delivering the lessons, they're telling the students what assignments to do and when, and guiding those students towards the assessment at the end of that unit. So one of the options here is a playlist, and with a playlist, like the sample that you see here on the screen, the responsibility for executing the pieces of that learning plan within that unit shifts. So it's no longer the teacher driving the bus, but is more about the student. So with a playlist, it gives students a little bit more flexibility as it relates to the timing as they're engaging through the different activities to gain mastery around that concept and or standards. So if you look at the template here, you have different activities, which is that step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, etc. And the students would be following that table in order. but at their own pace and engaging with that content in a way that helps them digest the information to be conducive to their learning. So that first column will give a list of the activities. In the middle column, they'll be given some directions as it relates to that activity. There's a place for the students to be able to provide notes. And then there's also a place for them to record when those things have been completed. So if you look on the right side of the screen, there's an example of a playlist here. Now, this one actually is not math centric. This one is for literacy, but the point here is that the template can be used regardless of the grade level or the content area. So if you see, there's a list of different activities that's there that's incorporating some different digital tools, looking at examples, engaging with watching a video. So it gives them all these different activities to do, and then directions. And then also notice what's highlighted in teal over there at the top of that template is it does give the students some benchmark dates, right? Because, you know, students are going to move at their own pace, and some probably, if they were given the opportunity, wouldn't get past activity number 1. So it's still helping monitor that learning experience, but it's giving the students some benchmarks to check into. So the learning plan is really shifting and giving students more control over engaging with things at their own pace versus it all being teacher driven. Another example of a strategy for differentiating and personalizing, excuse me, got a little tongue tied there. The learning experience is by using choice boards. So with a choice board here, you'll see an example on the screen. It kind of looks like a tic-tac-toe board, but this is employing student agency, which is where students really are able to have the ability to make their own decisions about the learning experience. So in the center of that choice board that's shaded in gray, it's telling me that this is for 5th grade and we're focusing on adding and subtracting fractions, but it's telling the students exactly what they need to do. They need to be able to complete at least 6 of those game board boxes, and there's more than that here on the screen, and that they need to be able to show evidences of them completing those activities. So it gives students the ability to execute choice, which we know is a motivating driver for students, as well as to tap into whatever their learning modalities are. So some of these things may be a game or an activity. Some of these things may be watching a video. Some of them may be playing a game. Some of them may be creating a song. But students can really execute that student agency there to make their own decisions about how they want to engage with that content to really continue to drive them towards learning and mastering that concept of adding and subtracting fractions. So you've got this example here. With that, they do need to be able to provide some sort of evidence of how they've engaged with that content and the learning that goes with it. So in the bottom right-hand corner on that template there, you can see that the students have provided some additional information about the things that they've engaged with and to show evidences of that learning. So benefits behind that choice board, just to kind of summarize there, is that we know that choice is a powerful motivator, that learning variability means that not all students necessarily enjoy the same tasks. So it gives them the opportunity to kind of choose what they would enjoy more to do as they're learning to master these concepts. It does continue to give them control over the pace at which they're completing those things, kind of similarly to like what we've explored with the playlist. And it also frees up the teacher. So now the teacher has the ability and the flexibility to work with students in small groups or one-on-one to continue to develop understanding or to hone in on those misconceptions or that unfinished learning as it relates to the standards at hand. So those are 2 great examples here of strategies or ways that the learning process can be personalized for students. So on the left is our playlist, and really with the playlist there, students have the ability to move at their own pace and digest the content at a rate that's conducive to their learning. So that really helps from a pacing perspective. And then from on the right-hand side with our choice board, It helps us employ some student agency. Students are making their own decisions about their learning experience and the learning process, as well as tapping into the different learning styles that may be within a classroom, and reaching those just depending on what works best for those students. So again, your visual learners watching a video, your kinesthetic learners, what are we doing hands-on with manipulatives? Do we work well with students, with our partners, so other classmates and things like that. So it gives them a lot of different choices there. So these are great strategies and the benefits there to helping students really understand how to have more ownership over the learning process, and to personalize the learning for students. However, we can take that one step further by implementing the use of some formative data to help drive these strategies into an even more powerful personalized learning plan for students. And that's really what we're going to look at for the remainder of our session. So if you look at the screen here, you're seeing an example that we'll use just for the rest of this conversation. I chose 5th grade. So right here, this is kind of like your year at a glance for grade 5. And you can kind of see the different modules or units that the students will be moving throughout the course of the year. And we're really going to focus here on this module 5 to be consistent with what we were looking at in the previous example with the choice board, which is really around that concept of adding and subtracting fractions. And for the sake of conversation, we're going to focus specifically on standard 5 NF-A1. And what is standard 5 NF-A1? That is asking students to be able to add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators, and this includes mixed numbers, by replacing those fractions with equivalent fractions in order to find those sums or differences. And it gives us an example right here on the screen. So let's take a moment to think about this example at hand. So 2/3 plus 5/4. And one of the benefits here when you're planning out how to personalize the learning plan for students and to really hone in on what the students really know or need continued support on is to anticipate what some of those common misconceptions are for students. So given this problem, what types of mistakes or misconceptions can you predict students will demonstrate by looking at 2/3 plus 5/4? I'm just going to give you a moment to think about that and reflect on what you think students could do or what kinds of mistakes they may make when being encountered with an addition problem like this. I'm sure we could spend a lot of time thinking about what some of those things may be, but let's just kind of break this down a little bit more. So you'll see on the screen here that there are several different examples. I'm going to start in the upper right-hand corner and work counterclockwise around this problem. So in the upper right-hand corner, it says added straight across. Very common misconception with students as it relates to this standard. Students have no concept over the value of a fraction or what fractions are trying to show us. And so they see an addition symbol and they just add, or if they see subtraction, they just subtract straight across. So in this example, for my numerators, 2 plus 5 gives me 7. And for my denominators, 3 plus 4 gives me 7. So again, we are really lacking a good concept of just fractions and equivalent fractions as a whole before we even get into the operations that would be implemented with it. So going counterclockwise around the screen, so in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see that the students multiplied. So perhaps they were given a strategy somewhere along the road on how to find common denominators. So one way to find a common denominator is to multiply both of the denominators together. So students may understand that there is some importance in order to find some level of equivalency, but we're still fuzzy on really exactly what that means. And so we multiplied the 3 times 4 together to give us 12, but then we just went ahead and multiplied the numerators together too. So there might be some understanding there, but we still don't have full understanding of exactly what equivalent fractions are and what those values mean. Underneath the problem, we're building even a little bit further. Students understand we're finding a common denominator, right? So with our thirds and our fourths, we're making them 12s, but we forgot to convert our numerators as well to make them fully equivalent fractions. So 2/3 is not equivalent to 2/12, but so we've got the starting blocks of finding those equivalent fractions, but we're not all the way there yet. So just a couple of things that could potentially happen as students are encountering problems like this. And I'm sure there is an exhaustive list of other mistakes or misconceptions that students may show, but these are some fairly common ones that may surface as we're related to this standard. So why is that important? Let's just kind of talk about how we would use that, and to kind of keep that in the back of your mind, we're going to come back and revisit that shortly. But you may want to collect various types of data to help kind of drive this learning plan moving forward. And there are some fantastic resources out there as it relates to the planning component, as it relates to standards with mathematics. So this is adapted from Achieve the Core. The link is at the bottom of the screen. I will also share this presentation at the end of the session, so you will get this information as well. But they provide these coherence maps that show that vertical alignment across the grade levels to really help understand those building blocks a little bit more. So for example, even though as a 5th grade teacher, I may be focusing on standard 5 NF A1, I also know that students need to have a strong understanding of the prerequisite standard for NF B3 in order to be able to be successful in mastering the current grade level standard. So whatever content, whatever pre-assessment data you have can help drive that plan forward. So for the sake of the conversation here, I am using our digital assessment tool that we have at National Training Network. It is called Mathematics. It is an online program, digital assessment tool that will help teachers create assessments within a matter of minutes and automatically collects that student response and then presents that data in various different reporting formats. So you're looking at a report that was generated from an assessment that we have called the baseline assessment. And basically what a baseline assessment is one of those assessments that's administered at the beginning of the school year to see, okay, this is how students are mastered the previous grade level standards. It's not measuring all of, even though this is my grade 5 baseline, so I'm dealing with 5th grade students, the standards are all aligned to 4th grade. It's not all 4th grade students. It's just some of those major standards that are really critical building blocks that will help students be successful in the current grade level. So the standard we just looked at on the previous page, which is for an F3C, is a standard that was assessed on this assessment. And I can already see from some of that pre-assessment work that I have some students that struggled with that standard. So I have that as kind of a building block right there. But in addition to that, we went ahead and created and administered an assessment after some introductory work around 5 and F1 for the current grade level content as well. So this is another report as it relates to that assessment. We do believe, like research shows, that you really have a good understanding about student, or you have a good view of what the student understanding is as it relates to a concept if it's been assessed with at least 3 to 5 questions. So this was a 5-question assessment for standard 5 and F1. And just preliminarily, I can look at this and at the top of the screen, you see this stacked bar that is color coded. So the green at the top means these are students who have met the standard. They have a good understanding of what that standard is. The yellow in the middle is telling me that these are students that are approaching understanding of the standard. They have some knowledge of it, but we're not fully there. And then red means not met. We are not performing well as it relates to the standard. So I can look at this data and I can see that, okay, I have 50% of my students, which are listed for me here, Amanda, Jeff, Nicole, Sarah, and Van, who have met the standard. So they are exhibiting some level of mastery as it relates to the standard and can use some additional work or some acceleration as it relates to this concept. I can also look at my data and see that I have 20% of my students, which is Ricky and Vicky, which ironically rhymes there, who are approaching understanding of that standard. And then I have 30% of my students who are struggling with meeting understanding of standard 5 and F1. So I've got a little bit of, I have some additional data that's helping support kind of in group where my students should be. But I'm going to break down the data even a little bit further. And if you joined us on our previous webinar back in December, one of the things that we talked about was how not all assessments are created alike. So one of the important things to do, especially if you're even looking at a multiple choice assessment, which is the example that we're going to explore a little bit more now, is to unpack what all of those incorrect responses are and to see if they are plausible distractors of plausible misconceptions that students may fall into. So just like we were previously reviewing, that students may just add or subtract straight across, or they're multiplying to try to find some semblance of a common denominator, or they haven't fully found those equivalent fractions. All of those things will help give us further insight into what some of the student misconceptions are so that we can target those topics and really help them move towards mastery. So let's take a look at the questions that were on that particular assessment. So question number 1 is a very standard question, but if I were to take a look at the answer choices, the first answer choice, or answer A, is the correct response. For this answer B, the students just subtracted straight across. So 5 minus 2 is 3, 6 minus 4 is 2 to give us the answer 3/2. For answer choice C, students just implemented the wrong operation. So we're not looking at it carefully. So even though we may have been successful in finding equivalent fractions, we are not performing the correct operation. And then for answer choice D, we're still kind of doing the same thing in terms of going straight across, but we also implemented the wrong operation. So don't have an understanding of equivalent fractions and are missing the detail of the operation. So when we break that information down a little bit further, we can see that we have a list of students who are just adding subtracting straight across in order to be able to choose that as an answer. So that gives me a little bit of insight. I'm going to look at that a little bit further to see, sorry, I went back, to see if I'm seeing a pattern for the 3 students that are listed here that selected distractor B for question number 1. So let's take a look at question number 2. For that particular question, the first answer choice is a distractor where the students would have just multiplied. Second one is the correct answer. For answer choice C, they just added straight across. And then for answer choice D, we subtracted straight across, basically. So if I looked at the students and how they responded to those particular answers, I can see that I have 2 students that are using that multiplication. So maybe they have some understanding of trying to find a common denominator. I'm not sure. I might need to unpack that further. And then I have a list of students who are just adding straight across, and I need to take note of those students. So the same for question 3. We're going to look at those distractors and kind of evaluate what the students may have done incorrectly in order to choose that answer. And then I'm also going to take a look at the students that fall within each of those particular distractors. So I would continue to follow that method for all 5 questions that are on the assessment. And then let's go ahead on to question number 5. So again, we have some multiplication happening with that first answer choice. We have the adding straight across for answer choice B. And then we might have some issues with regrouping as it relates to mixed numbers, because that's not something that we really talked about with that initial example. So again, additional misunderstandings or misconceptions that could be displayed by the students. So again, I'm going to make kind of a list of who those students are as it relates to those different distractors. So you really want to take a look at evaluating the quality and the content that's within a question to see exactly what that question is going to give you in terms of insight about student understanding. Oops, sorry about that. I think I'm going backwards. Excuse me a second. Okay. So let's kind of talk about this a little bit more. So we're looking at the overall data as it relates to the students within this assessment. And so one of the error patterns that we've identified is that students are either adding or subtracting straight across. So now that we've kind of identified with each question what that distractor is, I'm going to take a look at it as a whole with the item analysis for the students that this assessment was administered to. So if I look at question 1, that was distractor B. For question 3, that was distractor D. And then for 5, it was B. So you have several opportunities where you have students who are showing you that they don't have any understanding of equivalent fractions, that they are just adding or subtracting straight across. Sorry, I missed the other circles there. Another error pattern is that multiplying what you're talking about. Maybe we have some understanding of finding a common denominator, but we're not totally there. So I'm going to take a look at which distractor it was for which question and identify that with those students. And that's telling me that I have 2 students that kind of fall potentially within that misconception. And then any others that we can identify. So for example, the regrouping that was mentioned. So maybe we do understand some concepts around equivalent fractions, but we're just struggling with the regrouping as it relates to mixed numbers. So basic fractions may be okay for us, but we need some additional work as it relates to incorporating whole numbers with those mixed numbers, etc. So it's going to give me my students there. So really unpacking not just the levels in terms of like, these are the kids who've got it and these are the kids who don't have it, but really looking at a full item analysis of where students fall in terms of what they're showing you about their misconceptions can help drive those strategies forward. So we were previously talking about the concept of a playlist, and you'll see here that there are 3 separate playlists, one in green, one in blue, and one in purple, that are all addressing standard 5 NF1 with adding and subtracting unlike fractions. So you'll kind of notice here that we have 3 students that are kind of dedicated to that green one. And those are those 3 students that showed us that they're just adding or subtracting straight across. We don't really have a good idea about equivalent fractions and how that comes into play as it relates to the operations of addition and subtraction. So those activities within that playlist are very specific based on the misunderstandings that students are showing me from the data. In this blue playlist here, these are the students that were multiplying. So this is helping us understand, again, we still might have to work on some equivalency here, but we're pushing on into really using that to create those equivalent fractions with common denominators. And then in my group over here, this purple group on the right, these are my students who have even either shown me, hey, we've got it, and we're mastering this and we're ready to continue to practice or to accelerate our understanding moving forward. Or I have 2 students here with this asterisk who have it for the most part, but may need some individual support as it relates to regrouping with mixed numbers. With all of these playlists, because these are all students in the same class who are working on different lists, they're still having that opportunity to kind of pace at their own pace. And it's very strategic with each one of them that we have that teacher conference portion built in, and it's at different times for each group. So all of them have the opportunity to meet in small groups or one-on-one with the teacher to continue to work on those misconceptions or to accelerate And then we also have opportunities built in for additional formative assessments to really have those checkpoints to make sure that students are kind of showing us what they know. So those opportunities are built in, maybe in a different sequence, to give teachers the ability to support those learning styles, but that is very specific. And then the same thing kind of is incorporated into the choice board here. So if you look at this concept, you have the choice board. The directions tell the students that they need to complete 5 squares on the choice board, and at least 2 of them need to be in the color assigned to them. So it's the same color coordination as what we looked at with the playlist on the previous screen. I have my students who added and subtracted straight across that are in my green group. I have my students who multiplied across who are in my blue group. And then my students who are in that MET category, where they're showing some level of understanding of the concept, that are in my purple group. And then anything in the center is free reign. So it's telling the students that they need to complete any must-do squares within their assigned color. And they also all have to complete at least 2 within their assigned color to help reach directly to whatever their misconceptions or their understandings are. But then they still do have that opportunity for choice. So to just summarize everything that was explored here, when you're planning to help personalize and differentiate the learning experience for students, employ a backwards map design. So you're going to start by determining what those learning outcomes are by identifying those standards of focus, determine what those assessment strategies are. So we used a formative assessment tool, and then and I'm sorry, we changed the name. It is Math Schematics. I did not do that on the screen. I apologize. And then to create those choice boards or those learning path or those playlists to support that. So as you're creating those, please keep in mind to incorporate various types of activities that reach the different learning modalities. So just like what was addressed before, is it hands-on? Is it watching a video? Is it working with classmates? What are some of those different strategies that would reach to those different learning styles? And then also, there is a lot of planning work that has to go into this up front, but the great news is that once it's created, you've got it and it's done. But even better to collaborate with grade-alike colleagues so that you can minimize the initial time invested into building these artifacts up front. I will say that it is my goal whenever I attend a session to get one thing that I can kind of turn and implement within my respective roles. So hopefully I gave you something that you can implement after this session. But something that was shared with me a while ago and I really love is to think big, start small, and scale fast. So this does seem very overwhelming, but at best case scenario is to choose one of these strategies and just start it for one concept. Just try it once, and then you can kind of tweak from there rather than looking at trying to plan all of this big picture at one time. So thank you so much for joining me. I do know that we've kind of ended the end of our webinar time. My name is Sarah Wood again, Technology Development Manager for National Training Network. My contact information is here on the screen. Like what I mentioned, I will be sending the presentation and the recording as follow-up. So if you have any additional questions or you'd like to talk more, please do not hesitate reaching out to me. And thanks again so much for your time. Have a great afternoon.